I mean, my thing there probably is that, like, when I spoke to you and Chris, your approach to leadership is, in my view, phenomenal, right? And I think it's really progressive. It's really carefully considered, and I think it's what education needs. But in my experience, there are a lot of leaders currently, especially now, who were forged in a time where it wasn't actually the strength of leadership, but it was mimicking the behaviors of other people who thought they were doing what strong leaders do. And actually, there are a lot of teachers working in reasonably toxic conditions where, like you said, being present on site is a proxy for being productive. Having slideshows on a drive that, really is anyone ever going to check? Not a good proxy for effective teaching and learning, school improvement. And almost too many of us exist in those conditions, and there will be plenty who aren't on social media or just getting on with, they think that's the day job. Is there a way we can encourage more leaders to be more reflective, or do we just have to wait for them to sort of move through the system and hope that those coming through have a sort of a more, I would consider, more sensible approach to leadership, or a more considerate approach to leadership? Because there's leadership getting people to do things you want them to do, and then there's actually leadership that supports almost like an ecosystem that thrives. I mean, that's a lot to lay on your shoulders here, but that's not. I think it's important to acknowledge that there will be a lot of people listening who are not working in conditions that that we hope they would. So what are they going to do, and what can we do to help their leaders get to the place we want them to be?
Mm. Yeah, it's a big question. I think one thing that has definitely got to change if we're gonna shift things is this idea of accountability. And I'm not against accountability. Accountability is incredibly important, but I think that we have an unhealthy model of accountability across the sector. And what I mean by that is that often I think accountability is characterized by, so let's say you're one rung above me in the hierarchy of the school that we work in, and so accountability is characterized by me proving to you that I can get the person one rung below me to do something. And actually, often I would argue that it doesn't even matter what it is that much. But if I can just get them to do something, that means I'm a good leader, right? I'm a strong leader. I'm someone who people will follow because I've managed to get someone to do something. Think of the number of tasks that teachers are tasked with doing, and the person that's asked them to do that task kind of forgets about like what the purpose of the task is or what the value of it is, and it becomes all about completing the task by the deadline. Well, why is that? It's because they want to be able to go to the person one above them and go, they all did it, and I held them to account, and they all did it. And again, it comes back to that idea of like what is a strong leader. I think that if we were to deliberately remodel accountability as, okay, we've got a shared aim. And of course, we've all got this broader shared aim of improving student life chances. But within that, we've got a shared aim at this moment in time, over the next 6 weeks, within this term, over this year, whatever it might be. We've got a shared aim. Let's put that shared aim in the middle. Now let's get everybody sat around the outside of that shared aim, metaphorically or literally. And we are all going to commit to what we're going to do in service of that aim. And we are now all accountable to each other for doing the thing that we've said we're going to do in service of that aim. So head teacher, you are accountable to the TA. TA, you're accountable to the head teacher, but also to the teacher, also to the office staff, whoever it is that's around that circle. Everyone's accountable to each other. I think what that does is it stops accountability being about like unhealthy things like power and control. And it starts accountability being about the core purpose and what we're actually trying to achieve. It starts accountability being about education. Now, I think in this kind of situation, if you had the central issue, and the central issue I don't think is PPA from home or not. I think the central issue is, how do teachers do their best planning? Right? If everybody came together around that central issue and decided that actually we've got these three types of planning, we've got like the pre-planning you do, you've got this collaborative, the pre-thinking, the collaborative planning, and the day-to-day tweaking. We think that this pre-planning piece, or post-planning piece, if you want to do it after the collaborative piece, we think that that is best done in these conditions. So in conditions where you can control where you do that planning and for how long you spend on that planning. You can control, the amount of noise, the environment, the temperature, all of those things. If we all agree that they all make a big difference to that type of planning, then we all now agree that that's a condition that we need to create. We've all got a role to play in order to create those conditions, and we're all accountable to each other for creating those conditions. I think fundamentally it's a much healthier way of conceptualizing accountability. And I think the other thing I'd add to that is I can see why it doesn't happen, because we have a system that incentivizes performativity at all layers. If you think about the fact that we've got 2-day Ofsted inspections, you cannot capture the full complexity of a school within that 2 days. And so everybody knows that. And so it incentivizes performativity. But I think what it takes to come away from that is really brave leadership. And I think as a system, we need to develop and celebrate brave leadership that is doing the right thing for the right reasons, and platform that leadership more than what we platform the kind of more materialistic headline parts of leadership, like, frankly, Ofsted grades, etc., that kind of thing. Like, how often do trust leaders or chairs of governors, when their school is, 6 weeks, 2 months out from an Ofsted inspection, how often do they sit the head teacher down and go, even if we get a really crap Ofsted, we still think you're the right person to be the head teacher? Like, you won't lose your job. How often do we do that? I don't think we do. But I think if we did that more often, I think that would give the confidence to leaders to be braver and therefore to pursue what's right. And I think that then facilitates that reconceptualization of accountability, being we've got a central aim and we're all accountable to each other. That requires bravery, but we've got to create the conditions for that bravery.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I think now, one of the things we know is that teachers are already carrying a huge amount. And when PPA ends up being spent building lessons from scratch at home, something has gone wrong. And that is exactly the kind of problem the Story of Maths is designed to solve. It's a fully sequenced primary maths curriculum built to reduce workload while improving the quality and coherence of what gets taught. Everything is designed to fit together so teachers are not left piecing things together for themselves. Now, we've also been continuing to develop our early years offer, and that now includes built-in professional development for teachers of early mathematics. So it's not just about giving people resources, it's about helping teachers understand the mathematics, the progression, and the pedagogical choices that sit behind it, especially in those crucial early stages. So, if you want a curriculum that's coherent, properly resourced, and designed to support both teacher development and student success, then have a look at the Story of Maths from Alta Education. And I think I'm going to frame it almost as if this role, which you have moved into, as if there was a problem you were trying to solve when you began to think about how you design professional development across the trust, and what would success look like in classrooms?
One of the things I touched on on what we learned from the Teach Like a Champion team. One of the things that they did really, really well when they started that project, the first thing they wanted to do is they wanted to look for bright spots. They wanted to come around and have a look and see, right, well, where are the shining lights in these schools that we can learn from? And I think that's the beauty of being in a trust. You've got lots of great things going on. So one of our aims, I think, fundamentally is to get into schools and start to think about what brilliant work is already happening and what can we learn from that. What schools are getting great outcomes? What schools are just continually producing great teachers? They've got those ECTs who are coming in and having a really solid start. Like, what is it that those schools are doing? So that's first and foremost, like, how can we learn from those bright spots? And then you pair that with what's the evidence saying? So in terms of the EES mechanisms, they've been really, really important for us. And what we start to think about is, so what are these schools doing? How can we then learn from those key ingredients of the key mechanisms that they're implementing? And then also, what can we start to do in terms of codifying this approach? Because one of the things we learned a lot from the PIA project, which I mentioned earlier, is that the codification and that shared language around what excellence looks like is really, really important. It's important for teachers, but it's also important for a professional development standpoint as well. When we're talking about things like coaching, we need to make sure that we're talking about the exact same thing. It's really important. And I think coaching is one of those things that can succumb to the jingle fallacy. I heard this been spoken about on your podcast before, and it's something that's really stuck with me, the jingle fallacy. And that's a key ingredient. We need to make sure that when we're talking about these key elements of professional development, we need to make sure that we're talking about the exact same thing. So I guess first and foremost, learning from those bright spots, but then also starting to think about how can we codify what we know professional development, effective professional development looks like. And then I think the final thing for us is also making sure that we've got that purpose behind it. So we were really starting to think about, well, how can we make sure we've got a staff body now who know these teaching techniques inside out. We've had a great learning experience from the Teach Like a Champion team. We've seen what excellent professional development looks like. So now what is that going to look like for us, and how can we start to codify that? And then I think that's really important, because then what we can do is we can free up that bandwidth for schools to be able to think about the important things in terms of what that diagnosis is and what they really want to work on. And then as a trust, we can start to guide them in terms of how they might best approach that. So I guess in turn, it's that we really want to work on it's schools working on kind of like the what's the focus, what are you going to be working on? And at a trust, we want to really start to develop the how of how will we help you ensure that happens in your schools. I touched on those Kennedy's Paths in the Practice of Teaching. I think for us that's been a fundamental paper, because what we've started to think about is, instead of it just being, okay, we're just doing professional development for the sake of doing professional development, it's that staff meeting that we've always done on a Wednesday afternoon after school. It's just what we've always done. It's okay, well, what problems are we trying to solve here? And we're all collective problem solvers. Doesn't matter whether you're in nursery, doesn't matter whether you're in year 11. We're all in it together, and we're all trying to solve these problems, and what's the best way in which we can solve these problems. So then one of the things we start to think about as well is, well, let's have a look and let's think about our current offer. If we think about those EES mechanisms in mind, what are we currently doing, and how many of those mechanisms are we seeing in our professional development? And that was a really useful exercise, and I would invite school leaders to think about that in terms of what are you currently offering, because it's often things that you think, often it's kind of like, well, why are we doing that meeting? Why is staff meetings looking the way it's looking? And actually, how can we repurpose that time and think about, well, actually, we're doing a lot of things, but we feel like we're building a lot of knowledge, and we're doing a really great job of building knowledge. But actually, how can we start to get goal setting in there? How can we start to get rehearsal in there? So for us, we've kind of brought it down to these key ingredients, and we think that coaching is really important to drive that core change. We think that group rehearsal is really, really important to drive that change. And then we also think that knowledge building is also still really, really important, because that feeds into all of those key elements. And then I guess I think if we're talking about what success looks like in classrooms, we're huge on routines, and I'll talk about the structure of our professional development later on. We're huge on routines, so we want classrooms that are predictable. We also don't want teachers feeling like that they need to be kind of like robots. We want to arm them with lots of techniques, but we also want them to be free up their bandwidth to be able to make really good decisions in the classroom. That's also really, really important. So we can offer those core techniques, but we want that balance between empowerment. We want teachers to feel like they're empowered to be who they are and to do their job, but we also want to arm them with these really effective tools that we think that they'll be able to deploy as and when they need them. So one of the things we talk about a lot is making sure that we've got the right technique at the right time for the right reasons. So that's definitely what it looked like in terms of the success in the classroom. We talk a lot about inclusive teaching and belonging as well, and that's really, really important for us. And I think if you, what better way to have an inclusive practice than having a predictable classroom where students know that these core routines are going to be in place. There's the same routine for teachers getting students' attention. There's the same expectation that students are, paying attention and actively participating in the lesson. That's also really, really important for us. And I think that the final thing, it really does boil down to students' knowledge. If you're going in a classroom and students know things, then you clearly shows that you're having an impact.
I mean, you see that on day. I mean, we're recording on World Book Day. Neither of us is dressed up. If anyone's just listening to this episode, and those children who benefit the most from routine, you can tell they want their standard core offering in the morning on days like today. I don't know if you see that yourself. But it's never more apparent than when things are quote unquote fun, but actually it'd be a whole lot easier and a whole lot better for everyone if we just stuck to the timetable.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. I just I think routines sometimes get a bit of a bad name. You know, I think sometimes it feels as if you kind of like straitjacketing teachers, but absolutely not, because what you're doing is you just give them these core ingredients of these things that work really, really well. And then you still, because what you want them to do, you want teachers to be, you want them to get to a point where they're adaptive experts. They've got that, they're freeing up their cognitive load to be present in the moment, to be monitoring and seeing what's in front of them and seeing the data, interpreting the data, and then making a decision of what they need to do next. If you've got teachers who are doing lots of different things and you've got lots of different classes, particularly at a high school level, if students are going from class to class and there's different ways of getting attention, there's different ways of how the lesson starts, all of those things, you could say then it doesn't necessarily strip teachers of their autonomy or their empowerment, because what it actually does is thinks about the bigger picture, and this, you've got to think about the student and what it looks like for them. So we think that just having those core things that are really, really important are going to be very beneficial for our students. And then it also frees up teachers to put their energy and their cognitive load into the other elements of the classroom that are really, really important, and be themselves in the classroom as well.
So recently, I mean, even this morning, Pep's headed an autonomy versus individual expression sort of balance, and he's been looking at that relationship. Is there anything you have to do, like perhaps part of whenever you're preparing for change, or is it a case of teachers are on board and leaders are on board with this approach because the trust is almost like a well-oiled machine? Is there anything you do in your practice to make sure that you almost bring people along on that journey together?
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to Guskie's work, because I think what you've got is whenever change is happening, I think all teachers, you know, they want to get better. They certainly want the best for their students. And I think you've got, when change is happening, you've got a really small window for teachers to see that positive impact. We talk a lot about it, you know, in terms of like group rehearsal, in terms of coaching. You can talk a lot about buy-in, but the only time that coachee is going to be really bought in is when they go into the classroom, they step into that room and they see that change happening. They need that positive experience first. And I think once you've got that positive experience first, that's really kind of how then it's a catalyst for that change to happen. I think you can talk a lot about why we're doing things, and that's really, really important as well. But I think until that teacher or those students close that loop and they see that actually I'm gaining success here, it's the same in the classroom, isn't it? You know, when you've got a set of students and they start to really think, you know, I'm actually learning something here, that's when you can start to get that snowball rolling and you feel like you've got momentum. So I guess for us, we obviously want to make sure that things are being done well, and I think that's why when we're looking at those bright spots and when we're really going in and studying what those schools are doing really, really well, we can start to think about, okay, well, that's working in that context. What are the core ingredients of that, or what are the mechanisms that we can take away, and start to think about how we can then deliver that across the trust as well. And I think as what's great about the Kennedy's work is what that does is it frees schools up to focus on those persistent problems, those fundamental learning problems, so they can be diagnosing what the problems they feel like they're facing at school level. But at a trust level, then what we can do is start to continue building this process that's going to help them solve those problems. So making sure that group rehearsal is really, really effective, making sure that coaching is following the model that we think is the best form of coaching, which aligns with Step Lab and some of Sarah Cottinghart's work. And I think if we're doing that, we're helping them with the how, but then also at a local level, they can start to really focus their attention on the what.
I was mentoring a maths lead earlier this afternoon, and we were talking about, it was an introduction to the mechanisms and the covering all bases, not picking and choosing which mechanisms you wanted.
Yeah.
When you're planning and you're looking at implementation of things, what's the chicken and the egg situation, you know, and how do you decide what's important for you, you know, because you've outlined here are the three sort of key things that we think are really, really important in terms of school development and school improvement. Was that like a trust-wide decision, or do the mechanisms change based on what you're trying to achieve? I don't know if I'm articulating that properly, but it's almost like a case of which comes first, the mechanism or the decision to go in a certain direction kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, and I guess it probably starts with where that particular school is on their journey, you know, and where that staff body is, because obviously a lot of schools are very good at building knowledge, and a lot of, I think back to staff meetings over the course of a lot of my career, a lot of the staff meetings that I had prior to joining Windsor is very much it was just knowledge building. I think as a profession we're very good at sharing knowledge, but also you've still got to check that knowledge is in place. And I think knowledge is really, really important, and because as we know from the classroom, it's like that Velcro, isn't it? That the more that teachers know about cognitive science, the more that teachers know about Rosenshine's principle of instruction and all those really, really important things, I think the easier it is to then attach the other elements to it as well. That's not to say that we just focus on knowledge, but I guess then you might have some schools that you've got a staff body who are really, really knowledgeable about, cognitive science and all of those things and how learning happens and what effective teaching looks like. It might be that then that they just need a little bit more help in terms of bridging that knowing doing gap. So I guess it's a really interesting one, isn't it? And I think that's where ensuring all those mechanisms are present. But sometimes you do need to, it's not that you're just going in there and we're planning a professional development session and going, okay, well, we need to squeeze this in here. We're just going to do that for the sake of it. I think it's really important in thinking about how are you going to do that over time, because sometimes it's quite difficult to fit everything in one session. And I think one of the biggest changes for me has been even those Teach Like a Champion professional development sessions that I was talking about. Like for me, that's the absolute pinnacle of professional development. But that one session alone still isn't enough. It's about those small steps that you're going to be taking, and it's almost like it's a curriculum, isn't it? We can't just focus on one element, one lesson, or one professional development session. It's thinking about that bigger picture, and first of all, identifying what's this problem that we're trying to solve together, and then what are the steps that we're going to take in order to do that. And I think a big thing for me is the revelation of just like, teachers learn the exact same way that students do. And I think for many years, I experienced professional development that very much was very different to what our lessons would look like in the classroom. But I think the more you can closely align how you deliver professional development to exactly how you deliver that curriculum to students, I think the more beneficial it is in terms of getting all of those mechanisms and ensuring that they're present as much as possible over time. And I think for us, one of the things we've started to think about as well is one of the things we do in our coaching sessions is when we're delivering, we use a lot of step lab material. So we're a step lab aligned school and trust. One of the things we do throughout the sessions is we'll give our teachers the mechanisms, and we'll start asking them to kind of like tick them off as we're going through the session. And it's a great opportunity because what that continues to do is it continues to build knowledge. It means that you're really transparent with why we're using these mechanisms and why they're important. But it also gives you an opportunity to check for understanding, to see whether teachers are understanding those mechanisms and how they relate to what we're actually doing.
Like if I think about, teachers who are reluctant to teach mathematics, give them success, make them feel like they are teachers of mathematics, and then they'll eventually be doing it much better than you ever were. And that's exactly how your pupils are too. Because sometimes in early mathematics, we rush too quickly to what the child knows, rather than paying close attention to what the child is doing. Here, the doing matters. The process matters. The visible coordination of action and language matters. I can picture a child in the moment. Let's call her Amira, and she has been heard counting many times. She could sometimes recite number words in order, but when pressed with a small set of objects, she sweeps her hand quickly and says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, regardless of how many there are. Now, it would be very easy to say that she cannot count, but that's much too crude. The more accurate statement might be that she is still assembling what counting is. She has pieces of it, and she needs support to bring them together. So I sit with her, 3 shells on the table, not too many, plenty of space between them. Watch me. 1, move a shell. 2, move the next shell. 3, move the final shell. Then I slide them back. Your turn. She moves the first shell. 1, then pauses. I think that pause matters because that pause is thought. It's the child trying to coordinate action, attention, and language, and we shouldn't rush to fill it. Then she moves the second shell, 2, then the third, 3. It's a small success, but it's a meaningful one. And because it's meaningful, it's worth rehearsing again tomorrow, the day after, and in another context with other objects, until the process becomes more secure. So the first scaffold is physical manipulation with clear modelling. The second scaffold is the arrangement of the objects themselves. Not all presentations are equal. Some sets are easier to count than others. And if our goal is to help a child develop one-to-one correspondence, then we should think very carefully about how we present the set. A straight line arrangement is often considered easiest. There's a clear beginning and a clear end. The path through the set is obvious. The child does not have to decide where they start or worry so much about whether they have already counted something. And that matters because every extra decision is a source of complexity. If the child is already working hard to coordinate one number with one object, we don't want to overload them with visually confusing arrangements at the same time. So when supporting a novice counter,
I would usually begin with a straight line arrangement. Then as the child becomes more secure, I'd move to a tighter grouped arrangement, perhaps an array. Then a more dispersed set with no obvious structure. And finally, at the far end of the difficulty gradient, a circle. The circle is difficult because the start and finish are much less clear. It places a much greater burden on keeping track. I know some children who started counting objects arranged in a circle in 2008, and they're still there to this very day, stuck in a Sisyphean counting task that may never end. And this, for me, is one of the really important ideas in scaffolding. We do not just think about whether a child can do a task or not. We think about the gradient of difficulty within the task. What makes this version easier? What makes that version harder? Which feature should I simplify first, and which feature can I hold steady while I vary another? Now, that kind of decision making is at the heart of a good curriculum design as well. And so, in the story of maths, one of the ongoing decisions is always about what to make visible, what to hold constant, and what to vary. If the mathematical focus is one-to-one correspondence, then the presentation of the objects is not incidental. It's part of the teaching. Now, that might sound obvious, but I do not think it always is in practice. Sometimes we present children with beautiful but busy collections of objects, spread irregularly and overlapping slightly, perhaps on patterned backgrounds, and then wondering why counting is unstable. The issue is not simply the child. The issue is that we have not yet controlled the representation enough. And so far then we have two powerful scaffolds. First, physically moving objects as they are counted, and second, choosing the easiest possible arrangement first. A third scaffold is adult language, and by that, I do not mean more language. I mean better language, cleaner language, language that directs attention without creating noise. When modeling, I want my words to be simple. Watch me. 1, 2, 3. Now you try. Move each one. Say one number for each object. That's usually enough. What I do not want to do is overload the moment with explanation. A child who's trying to coordinate action and counting doesn't need a paragraph. They need a stable model and a clear cue. Then, during guided practice, I might add very targeted prompts. One number for each cube. Have you counted that one already? Which one will you count next? Can you move it when you say the number? Those prompts support attention. They help the child stay inside the structure of the count. And there's an important professional judgment here. We want to prompt enough to support success, but not so much that the adult ends up doing the thinking. Now, if I hover over every object, tell the child exactly what to do, and correct them before the mistake is fully formed, I may produce a correct performance without building any real independence. And so the scaffold must support, but it must also leave room for the child to think. And that brings me to another key idea. Scaffold is not the same as simplifying mathematics. It's simplifying access to the mathematics. The mathematical idea here remains the same. One number word for one object. We're not watering that down. We're not lowering the ambition. We're just reducing some of the friction around it so the child can encounter it more successfully. And that distinction matters, because sometimes scaffolding is spoken about as though it dilutes rigor, but the opposite can be true. Good scaffolding allows us to preserve the rigor of the idea while making it learnable.